we have Abigail Johnson, who I met when she was still a student here at Dartmouth and the president of the Dartmouth Outdoors Club. And back then, incredibly interested in fostering a sense of belonging, inviting everyone out into nature, and is now doing incredible work with CRO planning. We have Jeff Alexander of Vermont Adaptive Ski and Sports. Really innovative ways to get people out on the trail. And Russell Hirschler from the Upper Valley Trails Alliance, who's really tactical and innovative in just coming up with ways to get more people out on the trails with all types of innovations. And so big welcome. Thank you very much. And talk, and then we're gonna get to ask them some questions.
Awesome. Oh, all right. So I'm first.
Yeah.
Okay, folks. My name is Jeff Alexander. I'm with Vermont Adaptive Ski and Sports. I'm a 6 foot tall white male with salt and pepper hair and grayish beard. It's because of my daughter. She's 14. She thinks she's 23, and I'm our director of strategic partnerships, business development. And I'm also an adaptive mountain bike instructor, as well as an adaptive snowboard instructor, and have my wilderness first aid and a bunch of other certifications. But I just want to talk about Vermont Adaptive. We've been around for 39 years. Next year, we celebrate our 40th year, so we're really excited about that. We originated down in Mount Scottney. Now we're at 7 different ski resorts throughout the state of Vermont. That's just in the wintertime. In the summertime, we're statewide throughout the state. We're also at the Vermont Sailing Center in Burlington. We hike, bike, paddle. We're everywhere in the summer. We have a veterans program. It's free for all veterans. We had 1,600 individual outings last year as a veterans program. And we've seen a massive growth in the past 10 years. This would just give you an area of like where we are in the state of Vermont, how many outings we have throughout the state. We have 18 staff members. We rely heavily on volunteers that we train up in many different fashion to help us with our outings. There's a veteran outings. You can see that right there. My daughter's wanted to go. It gives me great here up top there. This will just give you an outline of like where we are throughout the state. This outlines our different resort partners. But we are over in the Upper Valley in Lebanon at the rail trail. So we work and do a lot of biking and bike path riding on the rail trail bike path and mountain biking are and sailing are two largest summer growing segments as of right now. Okay, so Russ.
Thanks, Jeff. Oh, and a big shout out to Jeff for making his way over to New Hampshire. Yes. So, again, my name is Russell Hirschler. I'm the executive director of the Upper Valley Trails Alliance. I know a number of folks in the room. We're a regional nonprofit organization founded in 1999. We're kind of a unique model in that we work in partnership with and in support of dozens of we call alliance members, trails committees, conservation commissions, municipalities, and other nonprofits to help them build and maintain their trails. We do our work through 3 primary ways. We develop trails, we connect people to trails through programs and events, and then we promote and advocate the benefits of those trails across the local, state, and sometimes national levels as well. We have a variety of different programs. And one of the things that we've gotten into over the last couple of years is building and developing accessible trails. So that's one of the reasons that I was asked to come here today. So thank you.
And my name is Abigail Johnson. I work with CRO Planning and Design. We're a recreation planning and design company. CRO stands for Communities, Recreation, and Open Space. We're based in Vermont. I live in Vermont along with a few of my colleagues, but we do work nationally. And we'll do things like master planning, research. We get to work with Vermont Adaptive sometimes on some awesome studies that we'll talk about later. And yeah, I'm here because we got to be part of this economic impact analysis that we'll share a little bit about, and very passionate about accessibility and adaptive recreation.
So I guess, so Vermont Adaptive Ski and Sports and Upper Valley Trails Alliance and a few other entities came together for a Vermont Outdoor Recreation Economic Collaborative Grant. to create a trail accessibility hub. We had all been working kind of in our own silos throughout the state to increase accessibility. We decided to come together to pursue a grant from the state to create this hub that lives underneath the Vermont Trailways and Greenways Council's website. And this is a one-stop shop for accessible trails. As you can see here, we have a lot of trails in Vermont, but not a lot of them are accessible. So we wanted to make sure there are more trails that are accessible that we know of, but they're not categorized. They're not, you can't find them. They're not on Trail Finder. They're not on websites. They haven't been, documented. So what we're trying to do is create more of an inclusive Vermont for everybody. We live within 5-hour radius of 10 million people who identify as having a disability. And we live in a 5-hour radius of 1/4 of our nation's population, and not even to consider our friends up north in Canada. So there's a lot of people within this region, and they all want to recreate. And Vermont is a huge driver in recreation in this area. So we want to make sure that everybody can recreate in Vermont.
Yeah, so this tells you a little bit about the different organizations that were involved. Vermont Trails and Greenways Council, if you're not familiar, they're a statewide entity in Vermont. They exist by state statute to advise Vermont Forest Parks and Recreation on sort of what's going on outside of state government and in the organizations like mine and Jeff's and other communities. They were the applicant and the overseer of this large grant. It was about a $650,000 grant that the entities got. Northern Forest Canoe Trail, they were looking at improving and making all the access points accessible, or where you can make the put-ins for kayaks and canoes along the trail accessible. Vermont Adaptive, as Jeff was saying before, is really looking at connecting their partnerships and their programming to all the places in Vermont and a little bit in New Hampshire, which is always good to see. If we are in New Hampshire, I can see that. Vermont Mountain Bike Association, a primary partner of Jeff's as well. But VIMBA was really helping their chapters who maintain mountain bike networks across the state of Vermont, and a little bit like Upper Valley Mountain Bike Association is actually a VIMBA chapter, but they do a lot of their work in New Hampshire. They were doing assessments to see how can you update and upgrade mountain bike networks to adaptive, or AMTB, which we'll talk about in a little while. And then you had the Upper Valley Trails Alliance. We were working across the state of Vermont to help organizations and communities identify if they can upgrade their trails to wheelchair access standards, which, when you're talking about sort of, if you want to call it a hiking trail, there are very specific standards that you need to meet in order to call something accessible. A little bit of there's a spectrum of accessibility that we'll talk about a little bit more. And then the Trail Finder website, which the Upper Valley Trails Alliance is the primary organization that runs it, but the organization that manages all of the spatial data, they're called Community Geographics. They were part of this as well. And the idea was that anytime that any of the entities in here either identified or built or upgraded a trail to accessible standards, it would be marked in Trail Finder. And I'll share a little bit more about that later.
So this breaks down a little bit of what Russ was talking about. This is made with my 36 40-inch piece of rope. It's easier and lightweight, and we're not carrying tape measures out in the woods when you're mountain biking around. But we were assessing trails, we're assessing water access, working with Vermont Land Trust, Nature Conservancy. And we hosted a bunch of workshops throughout the state of Vermont for trail builders, for different organizations to understand accessibility in the outdoor recreation space. As you can see, we had a few folks here. And then this is Trail Finder improvement. This is the information that Trail Finder is now putting on website, so that folks that want to come and recreate can have the information up front. We don't want to tell somebody they can't do something. We want to give them as much information up front so that they make that decision for themselves. Is that trail appropriate for me? And then we're right now the funding is up. We're still continuing some of the work. We have had some insightful conversations with the state of Vermont right now to continue this funding and continue this work. And so we're going to see where the future goes with this. But as you'll see here in a little bit later, after we did our economic impact analysis of adaptive programming, their folks want to come here and play, and we want to be inclusive for folks. And so the state really recognizes that, and we're going to forge through and continue the work. And so somebody had mentioned earlier about someone being an adult with a stroller. And I worked with the U.S. Forest Service. Vermont Adaptive did 2 years ago to put an accessible boat launch in at the Chittenden Reservoir in Rutland County. And the first user we saw at that boat launch was a mom in a stroller. And she's like, I would never have been able to bring my baby down to the water without this accessible boat launch. So it does span generations. Vermont has the second oldest population in the country. I don't know exactly how about New Hampshire, but I'm going to sit here on probably not too far behind us. So it does work, for folks with disabilities, the aging population, and then families with kids.
So I just want to take a moment, if you're not familiar with the Trail Finder website, or if you want to figure out where you can recreate on more of the accessible trails in the Upper Valley, I'm just going to give you a really brief primer on how this works. And there's Trail Finder cards in the back, so if you can't remember what it is, just grab a card and you'll have the website on. When you go to the main website, you will see a map with all of these. So right now there's 972 trail networks or trail systems that are identified overall in Trail Finder. Right here, we says accessible adventures. If you click that box, you go to the next slide. These are the ones that show up. So it's more like, I don't even know what they're. But it's much fewer, obviously. So these are the ones that are tagged as accessible adventures, meaning that someone somewhere has been out there. Either we have through our assessment work, or someone has actually been out on a wheelchair or an adaptive mountain bike and has sort of vetted these things to have them be able to be called accessible adventures. So if you clicked on, now we're right here in the Upper Valley. There's not that many, as you can see. One of these is the Northern Rail Trail. One of these is the Mascoma River Greenway. One of these is the walk around the CCBA building. This is part of the Mink Brook Trail. This is the River Trail. That's Pine Park. The Montshire Museum. This is the Norwich Nature Area next to the Marion Cross School. Vins. And I don't remember what those are. So one more slide to show you. You can click on the next one for a moment. If you find it, if as you're going through this and you're looking for one of these accessible adventure trails, there's two really important components within the trail posting that give you or anyone that you know the information that they need to see if they can use this trail in whatever mobility or adaptive device they're using. So the first thing is on the trail map, if you go to the legend and go to uses and you click on the accessible adventures, it highlights the accessible portion of the trail network, which is a really important component, right? You don't want to be out there and take a wrong turn on a bike or in a wheelchair and get stuck somewhere out in the woods. So you can turn on and off the layer that's identified, and in this case, it's blue as the accessible portions of the trail network. And also, as you saw on the previous slide, it gives you the information that you need to see if you're able enough to use it. So it talks about the width, the surface, the minimum, maximum slopes, cross slopes, which is this way, and then some other amenities that you may want to know, like so this is a place where there's actually, there's parking, but there's not a dedicated accessible parking spot. So you may end up going there and you may end up parking way away from the trail end. So these are important things for folks to know. So I just wanted to give you an idea of how you can find some of these accessible recreational opportunities, both close to home here in the Upper Valley. But if you're driving or traveling anywhere in Vermont, New Hampshire, and you're looking for a place to go, you can go right to the Trail Finder website. You can start to look for these opportunities both in the Upper Valley and elsewhere.
All right, so we've already talked about accessibility and adaptive recreation, but we're going to talk a little bit more about adaptive recreation specifically and what opportunities there are. Just to kind of ground this, again, some things that we've alluded to already, but when we talk about accessibility and the term accessible, this is a legal term and it describes a site, a building, or a portion of that complies with applicable standards. So we have the Architectural Barriers Act, that's for anything that's federal or using federal funds. And then we have the Americans with Disabilities Act, and that's for kind of everything else, state, local government, private. And so if a trail is labeled as accessible, it's going to meet those very specific criteria about the slope and the surface type and the width and all of that. Then we have adaptive recreation. This is any type of recreation that involves the use of devices or on-site modifications that enable people of all abilities to participate. And this is where we say, okay, maybe if we can't make a trail fully accessible or can't make it accessible right now, what else can we do? And there's so much more out there.
Can I interrupt for 1 second? So these laws really refer to buildings, physical structures. There are entities, at least 2 entities that I know of, who have adapted these laws to focus on recreational opportunities. One is the U.S. Forest Service. They have a document called the U.S. Forest Service Trail Accessibility Guidelines. And the other is the Access Board for Recreational Facilities. And the specifics of how you build to these accessible standards are almost mirror images of each other. Just one's Forest Service and the Access Board is for everything else, but they're kind of the same thing. So when we talk about building a wheelchair access trail and where you're putting hard pack and gravel down, we're building to these very specific standards. But there are no accessibility police. So there's no, you don't get the gold star of accessibility. No one's coming out from the federal government or from the state of Vermont or the state of New Hampshire and saying, good job, you got the thumbs up. So we take it really seriously. So that's why there's this sort of continuity of accessibility. So if we say we can't build to those accessible standards, that doesn't mean you don't build to adaptive standards. So there's sort of most of the time you say it's got to be black or white. This allows us to have a gray area, which is actually kind of nice in the trail world.
Yeah. Absolutely. So when we talk about how does adaptive recreation differ from accessible recreation, I put a few photos that are kind of the extremes. And ideally, you're building a lovely adaptive friendly mountain biking trail that a device can go over really smoothly. But adaptive devices can do some crazy stuff. They can go upstairs. They can handle some really rough rocks. These are like, again, not the ideal trail, but just to show that with the right devices, you can do a lot and you can access a lot of different spaces. And so what we want to do is, if we're optimizing for adaptive recreation, say, all right, well, how can we make it as easy as possible for these different devices or people with different abilities to be able to access these trails, provide that good information, etc.
And just to touch base on, we're doing a lot of this work on the East Coast, but and the West Coast, Bureau of Land Management, National Park Service, U.S. Forest Service out there, they might have a sign that says no mountain biking. That's actually that gentleman's hiking device. So that is where there's a lot of gray area and there is some conflict happening, but they're working through that right now. There's a couple of organizations out west that are really charging forward through the government to make sure that is a designation that is allowed, and it's a little more well known for folks.
Yeah, wheelchairs are allowed everywhere. So adaptive devices can look really different. These are a few different ones. On the left is a wheelchair that kind of has a bubble tire, and so it's really good for going over beaches and sand. The middle one is a chair that has a larger wheel in the front. So instead of having those little caster wheels on a wheelchair that might get really stuck on rocks, it goes over rough ground much more easily. And then the far left is a track chair. So these literally have tracks instead of wheels, and they can also go over rough ground really well.
The chair in the middle is called a grit freedom chair, and instead of pushing your chair this way, you can actually use your arms to pump forward one at a time too, as well, to turn. So it'll allow you to get over larger terrain.
And be able to access a lot more. So I just wanted to provide an example of how these devices are being used out in the world. So this is from Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And what they do is they provide inclusive hikes, bike rides, and camping. And they partner with Catalyst Sports, which is an adaptive sports organization like Vermont Adaptive down south in Knox County. They also have 2 grip freedom chairs that they loan out, which are those middle chairs on the other slide. So Great Smoky Mountains, and around 2022, 2023, decided that they wanted to do more to support accessible and adaptive recreation in their park. But they also didn't know really where to start. So the first thing they did, which was super awesome, is they partnered with their local adaptive sports organization. Also partnered with Knox County, and then Quinn Brett, who is now a consultant in this area, but has a lot of really great experience. And they created this interdivisional accessibility workshop for park staff to do kind of basic education around accessibility and adaptive recreation. Then they measured 17 miles of their trails with a heat tap device. This is a high efficiency trail assessment protocol. Basically, it looks kind of like a big stroller. And you roll it along the trails and you can collect that trail data that Russell was showing on Trail Finder earlier. And then they piloted these 4 inclusive hike and bike rides in their park over one summer.
I just want to highlight the interdivisional accessibility workshop for park staff. Informing your staff is quite important. We were at a ski resort, mountain biking last summer. I'm not going to name a resort, but you have to walk your bikes through the base area. Well, my friend was in the adaptive bike and he came through the base area and an ambassador came over pretty quick and hot and was like, "Sir, you need to walk your bike." And my buddy turns to him and says, "Well, I can't walk." So it was one of those really awkward moments. And so if that staff member would have known, it wouldn't have been that awkward. It's just, it removes that human element out of it. And it's so, workshops and staff information is huge.
Yeah, they did a really great job of laying the groundwork. And so what they did after all of that preparation, education, is they ended up getting their own 2 grip freedom chairs that they loan out from their visitor center. That's for anyone to use at any time. And then they also expanded their inclusive hike and bike rides. And so these are kind of regular ranger programming, but they're bringing in Catalyst Sports. They're bringing in more adaptive equipment. And then they're able to go out on these trails that they've already measured and they know will be really good for the equipment that they have and the people who are attending. So they've expanded them. They've run them in 2024, 25, and 26. I just looked at their website to check all of this. They have a whole slate of activities, including camping adventures that they have listed. So there's a lot of really innovative ways to incorporate adaptive recreation, incorporate programming, and even loan out devices to be able to use on trails.
All right. So we're talking bikes now. It's my passion. So this is where I kind of get really excited. But see, these are bikes you might see out on the trails for mountain biking. You also see them road paths in any type of terrain. The cheapest bike on this screen right here is about $14,000. The most expensive bike is about $23,000. So that's one of the reasons why Vermont Adaptive we scholarshiped over $230,000 for the outings last year. We don't want folks, to give them another barrier, which would be the financial barrier. A lot of these bikes are e-assist as well. So it is you have to crank the pedals to actually to get some of the little e-assist. They have varying widths, so they range from about 32 inches wide to about 40 inches wide. So that's where when we go on assessments, we love to put big boulders in front of trails so people with ATVs and RTVs don't rip down those trails. But sometimes these bikes won't be able to fit through at that point in time. So those are things we're identifying when we do our trail assessments. So just to touch base on mountain biking, it's been a big driver in the state of Vermont. Vermont Mountain Bike Association has close to 10,000 members. The New England Mountain Bike Association, which is 5 other states, has about 4,000 members. So the state of Vermont is definitely leading the charge in mountain biking, the highest trails per capita in the U.S. And then we did an economic impact analysis. The mountain bikers are bringing in money. Some of the bikes are ranging $6,000 for 2-wheel bikes. So it is an important asset for the state. And here in New Hampshire, you guys have some amazing trails, the Boston Lot trails. So what we worked with Vermont Mountain Bike Association and the Kelly Brush Foundation on our portion of this. We were Vermont Adaptive about 7 years ago. We started our mountain bike program, and we were going to the same trail, and our participants were getting bored because we knew that trail worked. And so we decided to start going to different trails and trying and checking them out. And we had that lens of like, oh, that works too, that works too. So now we expanded the access for athletes. We realized that we were doing this out of pocket, and we were like, wow, maybe we can get actually funded to do this work. And so now we are partnered with VIMBA and Kelly Brush Foundation to do this work through the hub. So building an accessible trail costs money. It's a little bit different than a normal legacy trail that exists, that you just kind of throw a rake down and you go ride your bike. So there are a lot of different challenges to the trails. We don't want to change the character of a trail. We just want to make it accessible for the bikes to fit. So things that we're looking at, we can move through this pretty quickly, but things we're looking at is width. That bridge on the bottom right-hand side was on U.S. Forest Service land prior to this administration, I have to say. And we connected the U.S. Forest Service. Hey, can you guys fix the bridge? And it was fixed in 2 weeks. So it was pretty awesome for that to happen. A boggy area where, we all have moved across bog bridges, but you can't bike across a bog bridge. So those are different areas that we look at. The width, corners. Certain bikes have a high center of gravity. So when you're coming around a corner, you have that tipping potential. And the corners and the curves need to be a little bit wider. The bikes are about 5-6 feet long. So those are different areas that we've identified throughout our process. If a trail system has us come out to do an assessment, we will take pictures of those locations, GPS located, and then talk through with the trail builders. We've had a lot of trail builders in the bikes, which is huge because then the trail builders understand the physics of the bikes. Adaptive sports is all about physics. We work with all kinds of participants, and it's you're fighting gravity half the time, so you're trying to figure out how to help fight gravity. Grade reversal. Sometimes the bikes are longer, so they can get stuck in the middle, which feels pretty weird on your bike. Or it could buck you over that next jump. Outslope. This bridge was at Killington, not on Killington Resort, but Killington Mountain Bike Trails, and it shook. So not only is it like sideways, but it shook. And so we sent them a picture, and we said, hey guys, what do you think about this bridge? They ended up fixing it like a couple of weeks later. It was great. But part of this program that we're doing now is that we're not just coming to your trail system and saying, hey, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, fix it. We're saying, hey, these are things that could be fixed. And then that trail system then can apply for a grant within that week. And they'll be normally 9 times out of 10, it's a $4,000 grant because these are not big fixes. They'll be awarded that grant. So then there's money to fix these upgrades. So not just telling people to go fix stuff, we're saying, hey, fix stuff, and here's a little pot of money that you can fix it with, which has been quite successful. And then features and obstacles. That's 2 different things, right? Features are things you want to go over, and they're kind of cool, and they're fun, they roll over. Obstacles are like, well, I can't get through there. It's just not happening. So that's the question, is identifying what is what on a trail. Don't want to, we don't want to pave highways through the woods for mountain biking. We want to make sure that trail still has the same integrity for that. And some of the legacy trails in Vermont and here in New Hampshire, it's just not going to work. Sometimes it's just not going to work. You're not going to be able to make that trail accessible. And it's sad in that case, but, we have a lot of rugged terrain here, bench cuts into, with high risk rollover zones down the side of the mountain. So we have to identify that as well. And so we do identify 2 types of adaptive trails. One is adaptive optimized, so fully passable, not too crazy, sections. These were actually trails that were built to be adaptive wise. Adaptive friendly is an existing trail that the bikes will go down. And so we've tried to really break it off as adaptive, optimized, and friendly, identify 2 different zones of trails, just to kind of keep that terminology consistent. All of this work we'll be presenting in Minnesota in 2 weeks. And we presented a couple of years ago on all our accessible trail work. And it's been resonating around the country. So I think Vermont and New Hampshire are leaders in this area. We talk about adaptive optimized. You want to keep that flow. You want to keep your speed. You don't want to back up 3-point turns. And then they basically lets the adaptive rider have a 2-wheel experience, which is pretty cool in those. The adaptive friendly means it works. It's passable. There's definitely some challenges amongst that area, but they're all identified on the Vermont Mountain Bike Association website as well. So you can go to the Vermont Mountain Bike Association, choose the adaptive trails, and you'll be able to find all the trails in Vermont that have been assessed. We have about 220 miles so far in the state of mountain bike trails that have been assessed. And then I had to put beer in here because I love beer, but just to see if you're still awake out there. But it's all about supporting amenities too. So, okay, so say your mountain bike trail system works and you have an adaptive trail system and it's great. Can you park there? Is your kiosk, is your signage too tall? Is your donation box up here if somebody's in a wheelchair? Is the bar down the street that you want to go out with beer with your buddies with after you just rode bikes and got sweaty and dirty in the woods, is it accessible? Can you even go there? So we're trying to work with towns. I just had a great conversation with the Vermont Chamber of Commerce. They're looking to go to all the chambers throughout the state to identify accessible restaurants and purveyors in each town. That just doesn't exist right now, and that should exist. That should exist in New Hampshire, should exist in Vermont, and so we're getting there. And, oh, and I had to just plug this too. We worked with the Vermont Land Trust. We just acquired 124 acres in Rochester. We're putting an accessible outdoor center in. We're going to host veteran retreats, a VI blind weekend retreat. So we're just going to host a ton of retreats on this 124 acres. We're going to put accessible yurts throughout this area. We've already worked on the trail system. They exist already in there. We're optimizing a few areas to make sure we can get up and down. But this will be one of the first of its kind in the area. So we're really excited about that. Shameless plug. Okay.
I just want to mention, Jeff just mentioned that when the Rochester Center is done, they're going to be hosting a variety of different kinds of events for different people with different kinds of disabilities. We were very deliberate in the work that we did that's really focusing on physical issues or physical mobility issues. We know that there's a whole host of other things that are ailing people and different ways that you can encourage those folks to get out into the woods, whether they're visually impaired, hearing impaired, neurocognitive development issues, so on and so forth. So I'm not saying that we're saying that this is more important than those, just that the organizations and the work that we've done under this grant and what you guys are talking about in terms of adaptive mountain bike economic impact is really deliberately focused on the physical disabilities. That doesn't mean that we won't cover other things in a future grant, but just want to put that out.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Good.
Yeah, so we have a lot of momentum here, especially, I mean, just in the last few years with this, with these projects, there's been a lot happening around adaptive recreation, accessible recreation, and supporting these things. As Russell mentioned, we would also love to do more. And so we share a lot of stories, we share a lot of the outcomes of what's happening, but we've also been interested in looking at some more data of what's happening, especially around economic impact. So there's a lot of data that's out there around economic impact of adaptive recreation, often at the state level, often broken down by different types of recreational activities. But there's really not a lot about adaptive sports and recreation generally, or specifically. There's like one study that Move United, which is an awesome national nonprofit, did on the impact of events, adaptive sports events. But really, there's nothing out there on the impact of the economic impact of adaptive recreation. So we got to work with Vermont Adaptive. We basically did a full year in the life study of their programs. We looked at their winter and summer programs, their staff and organizational operations, their 3 largest events, and just kind of everything that involves them. We did a lot of spending surveys with their volunteers and their program participants to understand how much are people spending if they go out for a day trip with Vermont Adaptive, as on the gas, on the food afterwards, anything that's associated. We looked at kind of what does Vermont Adaptive have for budget that they're paying their employees, that they're putting into their facilities and operations, also donations, etc. So we did this whole study and pulled it together, and we're able to estimate the economic impact of Vermont Adaptive over 1 year. So I'm just going to do a very high-level study, a high-level summary of what we found. But we did find an overall impact of $10.3 million. And so again, this is kind of looking at direct money that Vermont Adaptive is putting out, but also indirectly what's being spent because people are going to these programs, and then because the money that's put out there is also being recirculated in the community. This is a huge number. And this breaks down to $3.6 million for winter programs, often because that involves people staying over and getting lodging. And also it's the largest program area that Vermont Adaptive has. $490,000 for summer programs, $2.6 million for just their 3 largest events. And then for their actual operation, $3.6 million.
That was about 3,700 outings and 2,200 outings, respectively.
Yeah. So all of those numbers that I just mentioned are listed in this orange column in the middle on this graphic. But I just wanted to point out that there's a lot more that we came up with here. So all this also breaks down to, I'll just look at this top line, winter program participant spending, almost 9,000 days that a participant or a volunteer left their home to go and participate in a Vermont Adaptive program, $3.6 million in impacts. 25 jobs that were supported as a result. So this is like the ski lift operator that is taking an extra shift, or the local coffee shop that has to hire another person to keep up with the increased demand. And then 754,000 in tax impacts. I'm not going to go over all the rest of these numbers on here. Really, all of this is to say that we're able to find a huge contribution of adaptive recreation to the Vermont economy. And also, this was just the adaptive recreation that occurred as a result of Vermont adaptive ski and sports programs. So that's not actually looking at all of the adaptive recreation of people going out on their own time to take their adaptive mountain bike out to a local trail. So we know that this is important for many different reasons, but we know that this is something that people should be paying attention to because it's also a huge economic driver and an opportunity for Vermont to really distinguish itself as a place for adaptive recreation and to use adaptive recreation to try to attract people here. I know we're in New Hampshire, but to this area.
So, and back to the, if you don't mind going back to this, but as we found, the adaptive participants traveling party was 3.1 people. So folks aren't coming by themselves; they're coming with a group. Their average stay in the wintertime was close to 4 days. Those were great numbers. We did break it down pie charts too. We have that available if y'all want that. But where the money was spent, from gas to breweries to the local grocery store to lodging. What type of lodging? Is that a hotel? Is it a resort? Is it a campground? Is it Airbnb? So a lot of that was pretty cool to show and showcase the state. Because then I can go back and shake them down for more money. That's been amazing. And then Shannon Frank's a buddy of mine. Originally from Washington, D.C., he saw on Instagram that we were mountain biking in the woods. So he came up with a buddy. Both of them have had spinal cord injuries in the past. They utilize wheelchairs at this point. And so we took he and his buddy Ben on an adaptive mountain bike ride in Killington. And just a quick story, Shannon and I were together on this trip, and I was leading and talking to him about biking. It was kind of his first time on an adaptive mountain bike. And we stopped to have some water, and we were ahead of the group. And so Shannon turns to me and says, "Hey, I haven't been this deep in the woods in 8 years since my accident." And like I sat there, I was like, "Oh my God," am I really crying right now? I was like, I actually started crying in the woods, and everybody else comes around the corner and they're like, "Are you two guys crying in the woods?" And we're like, no, we're fine. But it was that moment where I was like, holy, this is what it's all about. Like, this is it. Like Shannon. So then Shannon kept coming back to mountain bike. So he started coming up to ski. And he turned to us one day and he was like, "I think I'm moving here." He works for NASA. He works remote, and now he lives in Burlington. And he's a Vermont resident. He's a taxpayer in Vermont. So like, these are things that can happen in Vermont. It can happen in New Hampshire, and so it's pretty cool to bring him into the fold. And then this. So back to the Trail Accessibility Hub that we're working on all together to increase accessibility in the state. We put this video together. And we'll play this for you guys in a second here. And it showcases a new trail, Brewster River Uplands Trail, fully accessible trail, gorgeous trail. It takes you out to a beaver dam. It takes you out and they're putting interpretive signage along this trail eventually. And I'll just let this video speak for itself, actually.
I've always loved being outside, and I think since being injured, that ability to be outside is even more meaningful.
If we really want to make Vermont a much more welcoming and inclusive place for people to come and recreate, we've got to do a better job of making it where more people can actually get into the woods. Having one organization and one hub where folks can go to for information and connection is really important.
The Trail Accessibility Hub is really, I feel like, a one-stop shop for kind of all users. For us, a trails committee, we have great contractors who can go there to learn about the assessments that have been done and how to build trails, and then end users for people who know how to find the trails and get out here.
Information is power, and having the Trail Accessibility Hub to have all that information at your fingertips really eases that potential barrier or burden that someone might face when deciding to go into the outdoors and experience nature.
The Vermont Land Trust has really taken it as part of our imperative to look at our existing properties and assess using help from the Trail Hub to really look at those properties and say, for existing trails, are there opportunities to upgrade so these trails are more accessible? And then for new properties like this one where we are here at the Pratt Refuge, can we create new opportunities to be more inclusive?
We're looking for a trail network that gets people outside that might not otherwise have that opportunity. If we're trying to build something and we have to get down a slope, rather than saying, well, let's just build steps and go straight down that slope, even a quick natural surface switchback can be used by a wider variety of people.
Here at Brewster Uplands, before the transformation, the trail was definitely narrower. There were stumps and roots, and now we have this great compact surface. And the trail out to the pond overlook, it is like night and day difference of how wide it is and how much easier it is to get out.
My power chair is great because with my limited mobility and stuff, it's not stressing, my upper body or like the functions that I do have. However, there are definitely barriers like my wheels spinning out in dirt or like getting stuck in things and if it's wet. And so having like paths that are super built down and compact that aren't going to constantly get like spun up in my wheels, I think is huge.
And it's looking great. Can you feel that grass and material on the edge?
I sure can. I like the fact that it's a walkable trail for somebody visually impaired. When I'm using my cane, I can tell the difference between the gravel and the grass. When Frank's here, I can hear his footsteps on the gravel, so that gives me a scope of, where I'm at on the trail.
We're just out for a walk together, as any two people would be. To be able to have a trail that's specifically designed for everybody makes it so that then you're getting out where he's able to go at his own pace. And I think that that's really super important.
There's so many benefits to enjoying the outdoors and being outside, whether you're sitting on the bench reading a book or walking a pathway with a friend or flying down a mountain bike trail. I think there's lots of benefits that people don't realize until they're deep in the woods or far out on the river.
Accessibility features to me are key so that I can enjoy the outdoors without having to rely on sighted guide. I can actually just swing my arms and enjoy the trail.
If you think about accessibility from a large standpoint, not only does it allow access for people of all types of abilities, but it allows you to do things with others and you don't feel the difference between you and who you're around, allowing everyone to be able to enjoy and do things that make them happy.
So I do know that Janelle Walton from this side of your guys has been talking with Jackie Dagger from Vermont. They're collaborating and they're getting some more. I think it's gonna be a bigger push.
Yeah, I was gonna just say that Vermont has been a little bit more progressive in this and a number of other things in terms of providing funding through this. Jeff mentioned Vermont Outdoor Recreation Economic Collaborative. So it's just another way to support recreational opportunities and really leverage the economic benefits of those investments. So yeah, the Trails Alliance has been in conversations with some of the key players in New Hampshire to see how we can, whether it's copy this or some way create some kind of momentum in New Hampshire. One of the things, as I mentioned before, the lead agency for the Trail Accessibility Hub in Vermont is a statewide trails group, which doesn't really exist in New Hampshire. We're a little bit still more siloed in New Hampshire than we are in Vermont, but we're trying to break down those silos and create some way where there could be a statewide movement to build more accessible and adaptive recreational facilities, and then bring the programming components in, because there are some organizations in New Hampshire that do programming. They don't do it in the Upper Valley. I think that's more of what you guys do, but on the other side of the state. So trying to create a movement similar to this in New Hampshire. Just takes a little more time.
And you all have some amazing adaptive programs in New Hampshire too. Northern Legislative Boards, just to name, one of them is awesome. They have such a good program. So.
Well, thank you all.
Have questions? I have a ton, but I'll just start off with one. We heard from one of your really important sort of moments, sort of story moments. If Abigail and Russ, are there moments where this work became particularly meaningful to you? I'd love to hear that.
I have two. The first accessible trail that Upper Valley Trails Alliance built was at Vins. It was a short section of about 750, 800 feet. Now it's close to a mile, and it integrates with the canopy walk that Vins has. But when we finished that first section of trail and the ribbon got cut, first person down the trail was a kid in a wheelchair, who, again, hadn't been in the woods, hadn't been off pavement in a long time. And it was just one of those moments of, we moved hundreds of thousands of pounds of rock, and it was sweaty and hard, and machines broke down, and bees were there, and to see a young kid getting access to the outdoors. The other one is actually one of the photos in the beginning of the slideshow is a woman sitting in a wheelchair looking out at a wheelchair accessible trail. That was an organic photo that was sent to me by that woman's son, who said, they live in Lyme, in the town where I live, and he couldn't find a place to bring his mom. She was homebound. And when we promoted that we finished this local wheelchair access trail in Lyme, New Hampshire, he got his mom out there. And it was the first time that he had been out in a while, because he is home taking care of his mom. So we got him and his mom out there. So really cool story.
Yeah. Also have multiple. I'll share one. Before working with CRO, I worked with the National Park Service, and I got to be focused on supporting adaptive recreation at parks. And so I was able to talk with a bunch of different people working at parks who were developing and maintaining their own loan programs for adaptive devices. And so that's where the Great Smoky Mountain story came from. But one of the moments that really stuck with me was talking with the person who works at Golden Gate National Recreation Area in San Francisco. And he has this really awesome program. They have like 15 beach wheelchairs at different beaches throughout the Bay Area. And they keep them in lockers, they loan them out. And he runs this program, and he has so much passion for it. He likes to take reservations by email or phone, because he's just always checking with them. He wants to make sure that the person who's reaching out, knows exactly where they're going, and he responds like any time of day. And he said that he shared an email that he got to loan out one of these beach wheelchairs, and it was very simple. It was like a line or two of text, just saying like, "Hello, my mother has a terminal illness, and I would love to rent a beach wheelchair, these days of the week, so I can take her out to see the ocean." And he shared with me that he's gotten a number of these different messages of people who are reaching out, and it's a very simple request, just to take a chair to go out to the beach, and it might be the last time that their loved one is able to experience the water. And that was a moment that really stuck with me, as all of you were saying, like, this is not just an opportunity to go outside, but to have a moment with family, to have a really special experience in nature. And you never know quite what is behind it.
Does anyone else have a question? Yeah, here.
I have a question that I hope I have an answer to at some point in the future. And that is that I don't know if you're familiar with the area called Pond Park, which is behind where the Dartmouth golf course used to be. It's been a park since 1905. A lot of people think it belongs to Dartmouth, but it's really its own entity. And we have one of the first accessible trails there. The first part of that park goes through what used to be the 18th fairway and goes up into the woods. And we have a no bike policy there for a number of reasons. you know, the trail impact that they have, the fact that we have a lot of older folks that use those trails. We've become Hanover's preeminent dog park. So there's dogs on and off leash everywhere in the park. And sometimes bikes and dogs don't mix. And we're trying to educate the population that uses that. We have signage at every entrance into the park. There are some people who think they can ignore the signage, and we have to have pleasant conversations with them about it. So what I'm getting to is if I saw someone come into the park in one of those adaptive bicycles, to me, I would be encouraged by that. I would think that's fantastic that they could use that. But our policy says no bikes. How do we blend that? How do we make that work? You know, we can't. It's like we definitely want to exclude mountain bikes and other bicycles, but we really wouldn't want to exclude, you know, folks in an adaptive vehicle.
Yeah, I think, and we've had some of that, our early days with U.S. Forest Service where that bike was allowed, but technically if I was the support rider for that person and I'm on a two-wheel bike, I'm now breaking the rule, but the person is not. Right. So we would always get exclusion from U.S. Forest Service for that. But it might be, you know, educating the consumer and the user that it is a mobility device. So that's not, you know, it could be in their eyes, it could be a mountain bike, but it's also a hiking trail. It's also an OPMD, they call it their powered motor mobility device. So maybe that is something that adaptive mountain bikes. But if you open that can of worms up that adaptive mountain bikes are allowed, then it's, yeah. So that's a challenge. Yeah.
Hugh, you know, I would say people always want options, right? So to say like Oak Hill, as they expand their mountain bike network, they're building going to be adding adaptive sections. So maybe instead of opening a can of worms at Pine Park, because I know exactly what you're talking about, it'd be a great place for a beginner adaptive biker, especially the New South Ravine Trail. Really nice terrain, but say send them across the street. And then if you do get an adaptive user that comes in, okay, then it's an opportunity to educate the community and the public about it. But maybe it's hey, we know people want to ride here, literally go across the street.
Yeah, I can speak to it a little bit from a federal perspective as well, where there is a definition of a wheelchair, and anything that fits the definition of a wheelchair has to be allowed anywhere a pedestrian who is walking on two legs will go. And so the gray area is, and you had alluded to this, Jeff, but like sometimes people argue over, okay, this definition is a little vague. But I think that is a way, if you want to try to argue that case in front of people who might not be super open to hearing it, is to say like, look, this person is using this mobility device and it, you know, fits this definition. Or there's also other power-driven mobility devices, ways to say that, you know, this bike is being used for a mobility purpose, and therefore it is different than if someone is using it just for kind of recreation and leisure. And so like for National Park Service, sometimes they would make policies on these other power-driven mobility devices to say, well, we recognize that there are devices out there that can be used by people with disabilities, even if they're not designed for people with disabilities, to be able to get outside. And we're going to welcome those, even if we won't allow someone who is not using it for a disability to be able to use it.
Well said.
Happy to talk more about that as well if you have more questions.
No, it's good. You know, one of the good things about Pine Park, the trails are wide.
Yeah.
They're reasonably compact. Aren't many wet spots or certainly no bog bridges and anywhere on our trails. There are a couple bridges, one that may or may not fit a wheelchair, but at the bottom of the South.
Yeah, I know.
The other
ones are good.
Yeah. And we have had people in motorized wheelchairs out on the trail, not the accessible trail, but just one of the main
Yeah.
river trails that runs. We have had people out. That's cool.
Yeah. Again, Pine Park is a perfect example of, there is a trail built to specifically to accessible standards, but most everything else is well within that continuum of being open for people with mobility issues and the right equipment.
We have 2 more minutes, and this leads into my other question. Is there like a good like reference sheet we should be checking our trails against to see whether we could, just make our bridges that much wider or make the, angles on the banking turns that much wider? Like, what is your advice for that? Do we have to get one of these heat tap machines or like?
It's a good question.
It's a very good question. Heat tap can provide almost too much information
Yes.
too sometimes. And it all depends on what discipline, if you're talking about, hiking or biking. I know that Vermont Mountain Bike Association is working with the International Mountain Bike Association right now to create a best practices. It's going to be nationwide best practices. Yes.
Yeah.
And will this cover the water access as well?
This does
Because
show
I know from reading about it, it seems like kayaking in particular is like one of the best sports for a lot of people
Yeah.
who otherwise.
As
have
our colleague
mobility.
at the Northern Forest Canoe Center says, water is an equalizer for people who have any kind of disability. So
And if we get more river access, it would be wonderful if it were accessible. So it's like one of the goals is to come up with some more sort of ways people could take small crafts
go to trail
to the
runs for a second.
river.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So, I think Jeff and I would say anyone that's even thinking about this stuff, that's like the best first step you can do. And there's information here. Again, this is a really good model, so that's why we're going to send you here. But there are other models across the country. It just tells you the things to look at and think about. Now, of course, we're going to promote our organization. Jeff wants to go out and do more assessments. Upper Valley Trails Alliance wants to go out and do more assessments. And from a professional sort of trail build perspective, that's the best thing to do. But if you know that if those 2 rocks are 40 inches or less together, you got to move them a little bit further apart. That's a great start. Or again, your road, old school technology, you put it on the bridge. If the bridge is 30 inches and your mobility device is 40 inches, you got a problem.
Yeah.
Right. So those are things to think about.
Yeah. A lot of people have the best intentions too. I was in a state park this fall, and they have a Moby mat, and the mats you roll the mat out, and it increases access. And they put the Moby mat out and down to the water, and it was about a 20-degree pitch down to the water. And I'm like, oh my goodness, you cannot do that. Somebody can't stop. They're going to go right in the water. And they wanted to put it over to a dock. And I'm like, the dock has no bumper. Somebody's going to go right off the back of the bumper. So I was like, but your playground is fully accessible and you can't get to it. So move that mat to the playground. So they have great intentions. They just didn't, that one extra step might have been missed.
Yeah.
You mentioned the planning being very important. It's like for new trails, it's worth perhaps walking the proposed trail or proposed boat access with someone who's maybe done this before.
Yeah. I mean, that's why the bulk of the work that was done under this grant was to do the assessments and not actually go and build them. Because if a group reached out and said, we really want to know what we can make accessible or adaptive, that's a great way to start. And the nice thing is that, when Jeff and the folks from Vermont Mountain Bike Association would go out and they do an assessment on the existing set of trails, they're giving specific things: move this rock, widen this bridge, widen that turn, and they're relatively affordable fixes. When you're talking about upgrading to wheelchair access standards, the price goes way up. So oftentimes it's a multi-year planning to get there. Our numbers are about $30 per linear foot for an accessible trail built to wheelchair access standards. Whereas you're talking just a regular footpath in the woods, it's a few dollars per linear foot. So it's a pretty significant jump. So it just takes time and thinking about it in the long run. And so that was sort of the best thing, is that we were able to provide a plan and a budget on how to make these improvements. And actually, I do want to say we did 17 assessments, and 6 of the 17 assessments are being implemented this year. That's awesome. So it's really cool that there's not only is there sort of an interest in this, but that there's actually funding that's coming through from municipalities and other nonprofit organizations to actually do this.
On the Vermont side.
And well, yeah, I mean, there's some grants you can get on the New Hampshire side. We're working with the town of Plainfield right now to come to just giving them suggestions on how to put together a funding package so that we can build a 2,200 foot wheelchair access trail off of the Plainfield Elementary School ball fields.
That's awesome. Excellent.
First of all, Jenny, thanks for organizing this, and my compliments to the presenters. This was quite professional in the way you put it together, and very persuasive. And I've been involved in this sort of thing for 30 years, and I learned a lot tonight from just listening to what you're doing. We are lucky in Hanover because Abigail is in charge of Dartmouth College, and they have their house.
Direct line to Dartmouth.
Jenny's a select board member here, and we in this community are pretty sharp in terms of accessibility.
Yep.
And Hugh takes care of Pine Park, and so we really have a lot of good talent here. And you did a really nice job of presenting this evening. I told Jeff and Abigail at the moment, I just want to make one pitch. I'm involved in Appalachian Trail stuff here in the area for people here or around out on the Zoom. If anybody's interested, 7 o'clock Thursday night, we're having our spring Appalachian Trail Angels first meeting, where we'll be getting ready for the 1,000 hikers who will be coming through Vermont, New Hampshire soon. So thank you.
They're on their way.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much.
I guess the last thing I would say is this is ongoing. I mean, this is our life's work, and I know you guys are in trails and recreation and transportation all the time. So this is what we do. Any questions out there? Don't hesitate to check in with any of us.
Yeah, this is really amazing. It's really also very interesting how, because you have the programming, you're able to capture all of this economic data in a different way than you would be able to just by demonstrating use of the trails. It's really great.
I forgot to mention one thing too about the programming. So if we identify a trail system that needs a couple upgrades for mountain biking, and then that system does get upgraded, the following year we will then host programming in that town on that trail system. So there's certain portions of Vermont that people have never been ridden bikes in their own town. But now they can, because those trails have been upgraded. So then the next year we will go register with us 2 weeks in advance, where we'll have the proper bike, the proper staff, and we'll get you out on the trails in your backyard. So that's been a huge success.
Right. Well, thank you guys so much. This is really great. And thanks for letting me.